Hello and welcome to Daily Prelims Practice, where we take up the questions from the Hindu and Indian Express and curate them as per the demands of Civil Services Prelims examination. The questions for the discussion are listed on your screen. Moving on to the first article of the day, the article is featured on page 5 of the Hindu and basically talks about the festival of Thissur Pooram. Now, this article is important because UPSC in the previous year has continuously asked questions related to various festivals, dances, temples, architecture, etc. that were in news under the art and culture section. Thus, this area becomes important for us from the perspective of prelims examination. UPSC in 2017 has asked about a question based on the dance performance related to the Manipuri Sankirtana. A practice question in this regard thus can be framed. The practice question here says, with reference to the Indian history and heritage, consider the following statement. The first statement here is, Kodiyattam is an important ritual associated with the Thissur Pooram festival of Kerala. Now this statement is correct because Thissur Pooram is an annual Hindu festival which is held in Kerala, and the Thissur Pooram festival officially begins with the Kodiyattam, that is the flag hosting ceremony, in which all the participating temples of the festival are present. Moving on to the second statement, it says one of the most significant features of the festival is employment of Avandha Vadya like Thimila and Chenda. Now, this statement is also correct because one of the hallmark of this festival is the use of traditional instruments like Chenda, Thimila, Edakka, Kombu and Madalam. Further, the Avandha Vadya here basically represents the membranophone instruments as they contain an outer membrane which is beaten to take out particular music sounds. Thus, these are also known as percussion instrument as one has to strike them to generate the musical sound. So, both the statement here are correct. And the question for this is, which of the statement given above is or are correct? And as both the statement are correct, the correct code for the given question will be option C. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is option B. Moving on to the next article of the day that has again featured on the Hindu on page 4, basically talks about the manuscripts and the copper plate to bring focus about the Shila Bhatarika and the poetry. Now, the article explains that the Shila Bhatarika, the celebrated Sanskrit poetess of ancient India, by establishing her as the daughter of Chalukyan Emperor Pulkeshin II. Now, this article is important from the art and culture perspective again and sheds the light on the ancient contribution by different poets under different kings and kingdoms. The article also talks about the Sanskrit poetic of Rajshekhara and thus becomes important from the perspective of prelims examination. Now, UPSC under the prelims has asked questions related to art and culture, and such a question was seen related to Sangam literature in 2022 also. A practice question in this regard can be framed. The practice question here says, with reference to the cultural history of India, consider the following statement. The first statement here is, Rajshekhara, a court poet during the reign of Harshvardhana, has given details about the Panchali style of poetry writing. Now, this statement is incorrect because Rajshekhara was a court poet of Gujara Pratihara and not under Harshvardhana. Harshvardhana basically was a ruler of large empire in the northern India. Though the statement is partially correct as Rajshekhara has written about the Panchali styles that preserves a balance between words and the meaning. Panchali style is also one of the 4 primary literary styles and the other 3 being Vedarbhi, Gaudi and Lati. Moving on to the second statement, it says Shila Bhatarika, daughter of Pulkeshin II, was well known for her poetry written in Kannada. Now, from discussion in very beginning of our article, it is clear that Shila Bhatarika, attributed to be daughter of Pulkeshin II, was well known for her writing in Sanskrit and not Kannada. So statement 2 here is again wrong. Moving on to the third statement, it says Kirat Arjunya, a classical epic, was written under the patronage of Pulkeshin. Now this statement is also incorrect as this inscription was written under the rulers of Western Ganga dynasty, and as per the legends, it was Bhairavi, a court poet of Drunvita, who has written the classical epic of Kirtarjunya. So all the statements here are incorrect. Moving on with the question says which of the statement given above is or are incorrect, and as all the statement given above are incorrect, the correct code for the given question will be option D. Further, the correct code for the previous year question was option B. Moving on to the next article of the day that has featured on page 3 of the Hindu, basically talks about the life of 6,000 villagers that is set to change for better in Odisha. Now this article primarily mentions about the Forest Right Act and how it has made the life of these villagers better. Now UPSC under the polity section in the prelims examination has asked questions related to various acts that were in news. And the question related to the Forest Right Act was asked previously by UPSC in the year of 2013. Thus, this area becomes important from the perspective of prelims examination as UPSC can again ask a question on the Forest Right Act. The practice question here says, with reference to the Forest Right Act 2006, consider the following statement. The first statement here is, it recognizes both individual forest rights and community forest rights. Now, this statement here is correct, as the Forest Right Act recognizes both individual as well as the community forest right which are claimed by Gram Sabha. Moving on to the second statement, it says the responsibility for implementation of the act lies with the special committees that are appointed by the central government. Now this statement here is incorrect. Forest Right Act since its inception has made that the provisions of the act and the rules that are made under this act plus their responsibility for implementation lies with the state government and has nothing to do with the powers of central government. Thus, since its inception, the implementation of act has been carried out by the state government. So statement 2 here is incorrect. Moving on to the third statement, it says the act also defines minor forest produce, which includes all non-timber forest produce of plant origin but excludes bamboo from its ambit. Now this statement is again incorrect. Though section 2 of the Forest Right Act defines the minor forest produce, which includes all non-timber forest produce, but it also includes bamboo under its definition. So statement 3 here is also incorrect. Moving on with the question says which of the statement given above is or are correct, and as only statement 1 is correct, the correct code for the given question will be option A. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is option D. Moving on to the next article of the day that has featured on page 13 of the Hindu, basically talks about the issue of locations. Now through this article we will try to understand some of the locations that are in news, as these locations can be asked in the upcoming prelims examination, as UPSC previously under the international relations sections has asked some of the locations that were in the news or for the reason that why they were in the news. And this article gives about the location of Brings and that of the village of Suzmeka. UPSC in 2022 has asked questions related to various locations that were in news at that point of time. So a practice question in this regard says, consider the following region in news and the country associated with them. Now the first region here is that of Suzmeka or Brings, which is matched with Russia. Now this pair is correctly matched, as Russian western region consists of Brings and the village of Suzmeka, which was recently under the strike from the Ukrainian side on the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war. The next pair here is Transnistria matched with Ukraine. Now this pair is incorrectly matched, as Transnistria is located in Moldova and has been in news because of the separatist movement that has been going on there, wherein the people of Transnistria previously has voted under the referendum for their merger with the Russia. The next pair here is Severodonetsk matched with Moldova. Now this pair is also incorrectly matched, as administratively Severodonetsk falls under the Ukraine's Luhansk province. And the last pair here is that of Odessa matched with the Ukraine, and this is correct, because Odessa is a major port that was destroyed by Russia during the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war by Russia and is located in Ukraine. The question further says which of the following pairs are correctly matched, and as only two pairs are correctly matched, the correct answer for the given question will be option B. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is option C. Moving on to the next article of the day that has featured in Indian Express on page 10 basically talks about the G7 and the need of the advanced nation to adopt the risk-based regulation on artificial intelligence. Now, UPSC under the IAS section has continuously asked questions related to various international organizations, and such a question related to G20 was asked in the year 2022 only. Now, another thing to understand about the international relation question here is that UPSC is going a bit deeper when they are asking questions related to international relations in the prelims examination. A practice question in this regard regarding the G7 can be framed. The practice question here says, with reference to the G7, that is the group of 7, consider the following statement. The first statement here is G7 has launched Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, popularly known as PGII, to fund infrastructure projects in the developed nation. Now, this statement is incorrect as G7 has launched PGII initiative which will attract investment of 600 billion US dollars in public and private investment over the next 5 years, primarily to fund infrastructure projects in the developing countries and not the developed countries. Moving on to the second statement, it says the permanent secretariat of G7 is situated at New York, United States of America. Now, this statement again here is incorrect. Now, G7 particularly has no legal existence or official members, and thus it does not have any permanent secretariat. Moving on to the third statement, it says one of the outcomes of Paris Bay Declaration, which was signed by the G7 countries, is to prevent future pandemics. Now, Paris Bay Declaration is related to G7 and aims at preventing future pandemics. It was signed by the G7 countries in the year 2021. So statement 3 here is correct. Moving on with the question, it says which of the statement given above is or are correct, and as only third statement is correct, the correct code for the given question will be option C. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is also option C. Moving on to the last article of the day that has featured on page 13 of the Indian Express basically talks about the EFTA and their aim to sign a free trade agreement with India. Now, the European Free Trade Association, which is a four-nation non-European bloc of Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland, are preferring a free trade agreement with India instead of an early harvest deal. Now, through this question, we'll try to understand the concept of free trade agreement and frame a practice question regarding the same. Because UPSC in the previous year, that is in 2018, has asked a question related to the free trade partners of ASEAN. So this area becomes important from the perspective of prelims examination. The practice question here says, with reference to the free trade agreement, consider the following statement. The first statement here is, scope of free trade agreements are limited only to trade in goods and services. Now, this statement here is incorrect. We'll try to first understand what is an FTA. Free trade agreements are basically arrangement between two or more countries or between a trading bloc that they primarily agree to reduce or eliminate the custom tariff and the non-tariff barrier. Now, normally a free trade agreement covers only goods and services, but it can also cover other areas such as intellectual property rights, that is the IPR, government procurement or the investment. So, first statement here is incorrect. Moving on to the second statement, it says preferential trade agreement is at a higher stage of trade integration than a free trade agreement. Now, this statement is again incorrect. In case of a preferential trade agreement or PTA, two or more partners agree to reduce tariffs on agreed number of tariff lines. That is, they agree to reduce tariff on a list of products on which they have agreed upon, and thus that list is known as positive list, over which the countries participating in the preferential trade agreement have agreed to reduce the tariff and the non-tariff barrier. But generally, the preferential trade agreement do not cover all the trade. Thus, the key difference between an FTA and a preferential trade agreement is that while in PTA, that is the preferential trade agreement, there is a positive list of products on which duties is to be reduced. In FTA, there is a negative list on which duty is not reduced or eliminated. Thus, under FTA, they are more ambitious in coverage of tariff lines on which the duties are to be reduced. Moving on with the question, it says which of the statement given above is or are correct, and as none of the statement given above is correct, the correct code for the given question will be option D. Further, the correct code for the previous year question is option C.